Okay, I'd like to invite the panel to the stage now. Dr. Osman Rana, who's a prolific writer and an author of this amazing book. He has written Norsk Islam, which I would recommend everybody to read. It's a very interesting and inspiring book about how to love Norway and the Quran at the same time, as if it's a problem. And I'd also like to invite Nafisa. She's just getting her microphone on. She's ready. I'm just going to get my papers while she's on the stage. Nafisa is a well-known director and has already made several documentary movies about Islam, among them Gender Me and Man Islam, and now she's currently working on a movie about Seyran artists. I'd also like to invite Seyran. Where is she gone? There you are. Whoa! Like to invite Layal, wherever she is. Welcome to the stage. She represents the organisation Top3. Very warm welcome to all of you. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think we have three very interesting views. But first of all, I would like to start talking with Seyran, of course, because you are the guest of honor here tonight with your work. As I mentioned, we are all very excited about the publication of this book. You're a human rights activist, but you're also a lawyer. You're also somebody who's opened a very unique mosque, the Ibn Rushd Goethe Mosque in Berlin, which is a very, very special space, I would say, which welcomes Muslims of any school, and also it's a non-segregated gender space, which is very unique in a Muslim context. And you've written several books, but this is the book we found interesting and really wanted to publish. And I think I would like for you to explain why on earth would a Muslim woman want to write a book with such a radical title, Islam Needs a Sexual Revolution, because it is quite a radical thing to do today, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you first of all. Thank you for the audience to come and to listen to us, and very, very 1,000 times thank you for publishing this, in my opinion, my most important book. And unfortunately, as you said, I could jump into the last word, what you said. Why we call it radical, why we call it brave, or we call it a provocation that we talk about sexuality and Islam. Some people send me death threats just because of the title, and this was a proof for me, again, to say, this is the most important thing what we should talk about. After I've written some books, a lot of articles, and being in a public, like Shabana said, a public person, I said, people, take away everything, let's talk about sex. This is the point, and was the point for not only the 68, it was the point 100 years ago when women started fighting for the vote and for the right of their own kids. A lot of people forget that the right for women to vote was not only the issue to go and vote. The right for the vote means a lot of other things, a lot of legal situation for women, including the right of your own body. And to have the right to your own body, or anyway, we own our body and we have the right of our body, has to be legal, has to be accepted in the society. And these are the experiences and the history of so-called Western countries. And what I'm doing is just, I take the book of Wilhelm Reich, and I read it. And what I realized that everything what he's written about the Christian society and the socialist society, the societies in his time as a doctor, when he realized that people marry just to have sex, is the same experience what I have done as a lawyer. Forced marriage, women came to me, forced marriage, young men came to me and said, my parents forced me to marriage. Why? They were afraid that I could have sex before marriage, so they married them, and so on and so on. That's the reason. Then finally I said, this is the deepest gap between the so-called Western countries, and I can explain, I don't accept these terms, Western countries here, Islamic countries there. I believe in the universal human rights and the universal of dignity, of morality, of being human. We are living in a whole world, and I don't divide it in Western and Eastern. So the name of our mosque is Ibn Rushd for Islam and the so. He was born in Cordoba in Europe, not in an Arabic country. And Goethe, who was a man who was inspired and in love with Hafiz, as most of you maybe know. So both of them were standing up for the whole world. Orient and Occident is one. And this is the beginning of my work. I said, we are living in one world. We have the same problems all over the world. And the main problem, what I have as a woman, is to be reduced to my gender. And because I am a woman, or just being a woman, taking me away rights or giving me to some things what I have to do, you know, my roles. And so I become a feminist. I was a believer since I think I can think. I believed in God all my time. I don't have any time where I give up my religion. And then become a feminist. And then start writing the book about the situation. And I hope it starts a debate. It's a debate. And I never say, this is the absolutely true. This is also what I have to underline. This is what we have to discuss. We have to talk about. All the Islamic countries, I believe in that, from Morocco till Indonesia, they have to go through this open debate. Behind the doors, we have the debates. We see a lot of Muslim men and women living really crossed the sexual revolution, past it for centuries, but it's behind the doors. And we have to see the reality and help people to live free and self-determinated. This is the point.
And how did Muslims and Muslim communities in Germany react to your book? Were people positive, or were they scared or frightened?
Both.
I'm curious to know.
Yeah, both. Some sent me death threats just because of the title. How you can write such a book? And I asked back, did you read it? No, I don't read it. I never read a book from you. I said, okay, you hate me, you don't read my books, but you criticize me and you send me death threats. You want to kill me because of a book you don't read. And this is one of the main problems of the people who send me all this ugly emails or hate speech or death threats. They are not really interested in what we are doing, and also with our mosque. They are not interested to come. I invite some of them. I invite them for a dinner. I invite them, and I said, I will pay for you, just have lunch or dinner with me, look in my face, and I will explain you or show you my work. I do that in former times, and now with the mosque, I invite them to the mosque. Please come and see what we are doing. It's not a bar. We are not doing an orgy. We are not having sex in the mosque. Believe me, if you have such a vision or if you think about that, maybe you have a problem, not we have a problem, then you should go somewhere else. So I invite these people to see and to discuss. But most of them are not accepting that. They're just sending me death threats. That's why I have police protection, and there are a lot of people, and believe me, millions of people are behind us, what we are doing here. And I just want to tell one story about what happened in our mosque 3 months ago, or 2.5. A man from Pakistan, a doctor, and another man from Afghanistan. One was Baha'i and one is a Muslim. They asked us if we could marry them, if we could their wedding in our mosque. Our Imam Muhammad did it. He's from Egypt. These two men love each other. They meet each other while they're studying in Los Angeles. One of them has reading something about us and call us. And then we had finally in our tiny 100 quadrat meter mosque, 2 men, so happy, and 30 guests coming from Los Angeles, from New York, from Brussels, where the mom of the Baha'i man was living, sisters and brothers of the couple, relatives. And we had a great ceremony, a mixture of Baha'i and Muslim ceremony, Islamic ceremony. We had music from Sufi. We had Sufi music. We had a 3-man band in this mosque. And then we had a record of the grandma of the Baha'i man. And the record was a pray in Baha'i. We listened to it. She died 10 years ago. And you cannot imagine how magic this time was, and this place and the spirit. We cried and they cried, they were happy, and it was fantastic. And this is just one story. I can tell you tons of those stories. And it's not just one thing like this happened. 2 months ago, we had a lesbian couple. Last year, when we opened, first year, a couple from Italy came because nobody wants to marry them there, interreligious, Christian and Muslim. So our doors are open for peace. And what happened there is magic, is spirituality and freedom of religion. Our doors are open. There's not a sign with a picture with a woman and crossed. Women are not allowed to go in, or non-Muslim are not allowed to go in. It's nothing forbidden. We love human, and we are behind the idea of love in religion. So this is a magic place, and I would love to have you there. Invite you, come to our little place Fridays at 2 o'clock, and you can see every Friday we have such magical situations. People come from all over the world. So millions of people are behind us, and millions are against us. So this is how life is.
But I have to ask you, Saran, which I think is an important aspect when it comes to religion, because there's no doubt that within Judaism, within Christianity, there are people who are trying to reform in many senses. Like in Judaism, at the moment, you have a group of women called Women of the Wall that are fighting for the right to pray at the Holy Wall. And within Christianity, you have a long history of women fighting to open up Christianity and maybe change certain things about Christianity, and also within Islam. But how long and how far can you actually go when it comes to changing religion? A lot of people say that people who are trying to reform religion are just cherry picking. You're picking out what you like about the religion, and that you're not able, that you're actually leaving the core of the religion behind, and you're just creating your fantasy religion which suits you. Which I think is an interesting conversation around here, because how far can we actually go? And I sometimes. As a person who regards herself as a liberal Muslim, I do sometimes become slightly worried. What are we actually doing with ourselves? Are we just creating a candy floss version of religion? And I'm just wondering, what do you have to say about that? And after that, I'd like to invite Iswan into a conversation about this, because I know he has some thoughts about this topic. So what do you think about that, Sarah? This is
It's a challenge, I know. I'm always confronted with this question, or myself too. So, is it still Islam, or what are we doing there? People tell me, this is not Islam. 2 days after we opened the mosque, 5 men came to our mosque and said, close this place. Don't name it mosque. You are not allowed to say that. I said, okay, show me in the Quran. Where is it written? All the facts, what you are now telling me. I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do that. Show me. They couldn't show me any description how a mosque should be. It's all tradition. So, if they send me death threats, I give them theological answers. So, in the beginning of Islam, it was much more gender equal. So, it was much more equal between men and women. And one of the most important for me person was Khadija. She was a businesswoman, and maybe I don't have to tell all these things about her, but she was older. She asked him to marry him, the Prophet, and all the things happened in the 7th and 8th century. There were so much better things and situations. So I try to research, and I'm a searcher. I'm still a searcher. Like you said, it's a challenge to see what is the deeper meaning of all the surah, of all the verses of our Quran, of all the hadiths. And I'm not really believing all the factory hadiths. You know, in several countries, in some countries, they have really huge hadith factories. You know, this is what I used to say. So there are a lot of hadiths coming every year, new every month. Sometimes in Turkey, I'm coming from Turkey, so a new hadith. It's not allowed to have nail color polish, and you are not allowed to eat while you are walking. Why? Because the Prophet never eat when he was walking. You are not allowed to do sports. Why? There's a hadith. He never did sports, but he was riding horses, and he was doing a lot of other things. So many stupid things were explaining and telling by so-called authorities that the challenge is to say, okay, what Martin Luther did is what we have to do in our religion. We have to understand what we are reading. This is the first step. How many Muslims really understand their own religion? This is the first point where I start. I want to understand what I believe in. And then we can ask ourselves, what are the pillars, and what are the really deeper, what is holding us together, or our religion? And on this point, we have to understand. And then start to understand, start to read, sit together. And coming from Turkey, I can tell you, in our country, people are proud to have their own beer. In Turkey, they sell beer, alcohol. Name is Efes. So if Turkish people are so proud to be in competition with the Western countries, having their own beer and having rakı and selling this. I grew up in this country. Everywhere mosques, uncles and aunts drinking alcohol and going Friday to Juma, my uncles, my cousins. So as a child, I have to bring together this. They were my role models, they were the adults, and I was grown up in a Muslim country. So do you call Turkey a non-Muslim country? No, you cannot. And all the money paid for this alcohol and all the taxes go to the government, and Erdogan is using this. Confusing. Isn't it confusing? So I say, people, please, there are much more confusing things than what I'm doing in Islamic countries, what you are doing there, and drinking alcohol behind the carpets in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Iran, this double standards, double morality, and all the prostitution going on in these countries, abusing children, all the things what we are not talking about, saying in Western countries, this is a Western style, what you are doing. I'm sorry, love for human and for animals is universal. Isn't it, Shabana? It's not Western style, it's not my style. What we are doing there is not taking away the spirituality, it's going to the spirituality. I'm looking for the magic in my religion. This was always what keeps me in my religion. My parents were absolutely calm with the religion. They were traditional. I ran away from home because they were traditional. So my last sentence in this point is, I'm not fighting against Islam. I'm fighting against patriarchy. And so the answer is, I'm looking for the patriarchy structures. That's what I try to destroy. And the Reformation is on this point. Take away the patriarchy, come together equal, men and women, and all kinds of identities. And we have peace in our religion. And I think we have a very, very nice religion. It's beautiful, much beautiful than a lot of right far-wing people think.
Ms. Maulana, in today's newspaper, you had quite a critical view of Simon Artis's project. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit about your thoughts on Simon Artis's relation to Islam and religion.
Firstly, I believe this debate is very important, and I do agree that there are too many discussions going on among Muslims behind the curtains, and they need to be more open, particularly for the youth, not in order to please the non-Muslims, but particularly for the youth. It's important to have more open discussions. Still, I do believe that it is wrong to state that sexuality in Islam is regarded as something negative. Actually, it's the opposite. Traditionally, sexuality is viewed very positively. It's not just a means to reproduction, but also to derive pleasure from. And that's the Prophet spoke about that. His wife spoke about that, his companions, and they openly discussed sexuality. Yes, you have cultures with Muslim majorities which are far more conservative in speaking about sexuality, but that is also rooted in culture. Like my heritage is from Indo-Pak. And if you talk to Sikhs and Hindus from India, they will also be very modest when dealing with sexuality. So it's not only Islamic or Muslim issue. My major issue with Ms. Artis's book and her project is that I regard it as a sign of neo-Orientalism, that one regards Muslim cultures somewhat inferior, that they're not civilized enough, and that many liberals and the so-called new atheists in the West are looking for so-called liberal and secular voices among the Muslims who, with their subjectivity, can challenge Islam and reform Islam and unite Islam with the shifting trends of contemporary liberalism. So that's a major issue. And I think earlier many new atheists and liberals in the West were very fond of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, but of course she literally became too militant, I think, when she spoke at being at war with Islam. So I'm not comparing you with her, but your book is far more constructive.
She's a friend of mine. I like her.
Okay.
We are, yeah. I like her even when she's
Okay.
not Muslim anymore. But you can.
Yes,
I opened the mosque and she's out of the mosque, but we can deal together very well. She can understand me and support this idea. So I understand what you mean.
That,
yeah, and Irshad Manji is the next. Yeah,
no, I'm not going to mention anyone else, but I and many Muslims see your project in the same tradition, and particularly in your book, you mentioned the 68 movement, the 68ers, who serve as a model for the reform of Islam. And we all know this 68ers. I mean, they were leftist liberals. They wanted to create revolutions, among them sexual revolutions. And you also mentioned that Muslims should have their Alfred Kinsey, an American sexologist who believed in open relationships and who was an atheist. So I don't care about who people want to have as their role models, but I think we should be open and honest about what this is. I believe this is 68er thinking framed as Islam, camouflaged as Islam. And I see that as a continuation of the post-colonial imperialism. I recently read about Lord Cromer, who was the British administrator in Egypt when Egypt was colonized. And he was very much against females voting in Britain, whereas he was obsessed with the hijab and the veil in Egypt. He said that Muslim women should be liberated, right? But still and many of the colonial powers were obsessed, especially the French, with derailing the women, as also Seren Ates is in her book. And let me also mention one more point.
You have to say the right. You know, I have to stop you because it's not true what you are saying.
Can you just finish my part?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. You state here that you don't have an issue with Islam, and I want to believe you. But reading your book, I find it quite hard because you are making many sweeping generalizations in the book. You write initially in the book that, and I quote, Muslim men have an issue when it comes to our free world. And there are no nuances. Muslim men. So you're saying that I, who work part-time and take care of my kids while my wife is working full-time, that I have an issue with our free world? No nuances. And I think that's a discussion, a debate, and a book should be more nuanced. And also, you speak about Islamic politicians not able to differentiate between religion and politics. Your country of origin had a very authoritarian secularism, where I think even the president's or the prime minister's wife was not allowed to wear the hijab at a public hospital until recently. And you have the Ba'athist parties in Syria, Iraq. Saddam was a secularist. So I think we need to have more nuances. And lastly, speaking about why Muslims nowadays are not so upfront when it comes to sexuality. I don't think it's because of Islam, but what is wrong with modesty? What is wrong with using euphemisms? What is wrong with gentleness and speaking politely about intimate relations? And there are some cultural differences. I had a visitor once, a friend, an Anglo-Saxon Californian friend from America. He visited Europe and he also visited Norway. And he's a liberal Californian. And one of his main questions was, why are Europeans naked at the gyms? He was not used to that from the US, apparently. So there are even cultural differences in the West. So nudity, euphemisms, modesty can be a good value. And if you read Roger Scruton, he said that he became a conservative in 1968 in Paris. And that struck me.
Seren, will you answer?
Yeah,
it would be interesting in short because I'm just to introduce the others too.
Anyway, you will read the book. I will just ask you to read it because when I talk about the 68, because I have a chapter, I have to explain the 68 to understand why I use the terms. And then finally I explain that the 68s failed in many points and it's not perfect what they have done. And this sexual revolution in Western countries are not finished, especially when it comes to women's rights, a lot of men used the 68s to abuse women and do pressure on the women too. And as a vernunftbegabter Mensch, as a person who's using his brain, and as a feminist and as a lawyer, believe me, I know where the 68s failed. And then finally I come to the end and say, maybe now in our century, we can learn from the history. We can look and see what the Muslim communities and Muslim people bring when it comes to migration to Europe, and then go the way together. This is my solution. And do and see what the Western countries have done maybe wrong when it comes to advertising, for example, taking off all the clothes and put the women on the car for advertising. It's the same to veil women. And the last point, veiling. I'm a lawyer defending the neutrality law at court in Germany, in Berlin. This is the right of the city to defend himself, because we have a law that teachers are not allowed to wear headscarf. For teachers, for policemen, for judge, in having taken a place in a state profession or representing the state. I'm against veiled women, and I'm against veiling little kids, childs. I don't have any problem with conservative people. In my world, what I think about and believe in democracy, there's a lot of space for Erdogan, for example. But in his world, there is no little space for me. I cannot go in my country because this man is a dictator who would not allow anymore Muslims like me to live in our country.
That's very wrong.
That's not and he is the man who's calling the European Islam is not happening. There's no existing. He's not accepting a European Islam. They made a conference in Cologne in January, and he said he will moderate the Muslims in Europe. So we have a dictator in Turkey. He's very authoritarian, and it's Erdogan Turkey, what I'm fighting against, and Erdogan Islam, what I'm fighting against, and the Muslim Brotherhood. This is, and this veiled, little girls veiled is absolutely not acceptable. This is not modesty. This is abusing kids, and the kids have rights, and we have to fight for the kids.
I would like to introduce the two other people from the panel. Laya, when you hear Usman and when you hear Sairan, there are obviously certain things that Sairan says that are very interesting, but Usman also has some very interesting aspects when it comes to modesty. And especially, in Norway, we've had a whole debate around the TV series Skam, where lots of really interesting problems regarding young people have been having discussed, and modesty and shame is something that affects all of us. When you think about this debate and Sairan's book, what are your reflections on this?
I found it difficult to hold myself while Usman was speaking, because I disagree with you in so many levels. Like when you say that Islam doesn't have problems speaking about sexuality, we have a problem, because we see girls, boys also, but especially girls, raised up thinking that God will burn them in hell if they have sex before they get married, or if they have a friend who's homosexual, or if they... And I have a problem with the word losing virginity, because there's nothing to lose. Lose is when you lose something valuable like a mobile phone or a purse or something, but virginity is not something you lose. And we know, because I was raised in a Muslim family, and we at Born Free or Født Fri, we meet girls every single day that say, my family do not allow me to have sex before I get married, so I need to get married early to be able to have sex. And that's a reality that you need to accept, that maybe some of your friends or the people you have around you do speak about sexuality openly, but we know that the major of people do not. And we see our problem is not, and I think you agree with me on that, Our problem is not that my family do not accept sex before marriage. Our problem is when you try to kill your daughters because they had sex before they get married, like in Saudi Arabia or in Iran or Iraq and Afghanistan. We see those examples, and even here in Norway, we had an example not a long time ago where a girl, her father tried to kill her because she had sex and she had a boyfriend before she got married. And this is something you need to realize, because for me, when you put I don't know, when you hide those problems, you just make them grow up more, because they can still do what they do in the in a hidden room, and teenagers won't be able to speak about that openly, that they do have this problem, because we refuse to accept that this problem even exists.
I would just like to note this and comment upon this, because I think I grew up in the southern part of Norway where Christianity is very strong. Yeah. And I have to say, I have similar experiences with Christian families where I grew up, where the girls, if they showed that they were sexually active in any way, they would be very hardly condemned by the Christian community and by the community at large. So when we're talking about this, I have a problem by making it specifically a Muslim or Islamic problem, because I think it's a huge problem whichever religion you belong to. But I will let Usman, before I introduce Nafis, to comment. Don't you think that the Muslim community needs to speak out aloud against these things that happen to young Muslim women? There is a genuine problem within our communities?
Look, we are not in the 90s, I think. I mean, we are speaking of different topics. I'm speaking of, like, Islamically, sexuality has been spoken about, like in medieval Islam, among scholars, among the prophets, his companions, the Sahaba. But what you are bringing up is very important to speak about. And we have spoken about these issues many times for many years. And I still remember, I was, I think, 14 or 15 years old when Ms. Shabana Rahman raised this issue. Initially, I was appalled. I mean, I was shocked. Why is she speaking like this about my culture, my heritage, right? But I can see that her fight has contributed, to raise these issues, that Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus are speaking about them. And it is happening, and it has happened. So me not mentioning that right now is not the same as I don't want to speak about it, or I don't think those issues are issues. I really deeply think that they are issues. But then I also think we should be able to differentiate between some aspects which are culturally dependent and some aspects which are more Islamically dependent, right? And I think many positive things have happened after the debates of the 90s, in the early 2000s. I think last year a book was published by one Norwegian Muslim feminist. She calls herself a feminist, Bushra Ishaq. And she did a survey which showed that the overwhelming majority of Muslims in Norway support gender equality. And we also have surveys that show that Muslim girls are taking higher education much more frequently than the majority in the society. So there are positive things happening, and of course some of the reasons are people like Shabana Rahman bringing these issues up 15, 20 years ago. So I think we're speaking of different things, and maybe I can get back to the theological foundations of the context later on. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I would like to bring in Nafis into this conversation, because you have actually made several documentaries that touch upon these topics. You made Gently, Man Islam, and A Balloon for Allah, and all these three movies definitely touch upon the topics we are talking about today. What are your thoughts when you hear the three of them talking about these issues?
First of all, I would like to just refer to Shabana. Where is she? Yes, you were opening this speech with "I love dogs," so I think it was fabulous. And I was also just thinking, we are talking about religion and sexuality, and my question to you, Shabana, you have several dogs. Do you think that they have religion? No, or I don't know, but
they have just unconditional love.
They have some unconditional love, yes. So, and then Seyran said that she wants to bring magic in religion, and that was the key for me. That I really wanted to make. I want to make a film about Seyran, because what is how we when we define human beings and their attachment to love and their attachment to religion, and there is something which is called imagination. We imagine there is love. We can hold it. We imagine there is God. We take this spirit in our heart, and we imagine that our friends love us. There is always an imagination. And there is always a questioning. There always a questioning, maybe, maybe not. But the conservative way of looking at life and religion cuts the essence of imagination. And when you cut this imagination, and then you say it is tradition, and this is how we do it. When I was a young girl, like 13, 14 years, I have seen some of my family members fasting, and they were talking about how great Muslims they were. And they were fasting, and then they were eating big dinners. And they were talking and, talking about the next fasting. And they were getting up in the middle of the night, and they were eating a lot, and then they were fasting. So I was questioning, like, the way they are eating, was it really spiritual? I mean, the way we are fasting, like you eat everything, when you are opening your... So when I remember, when I questioned, it was like such a shame on you. How can you ask that question? This is how we do. So what I think is Seyran Ateş is bringing both imagination, or not bringing, she is making us conscious about our imagination and also our questioning. And Seyran is not the first one who is questioning in Islam. I mean, it has been doing it for centuries. So we can talk about many scholars. So going back to that, I do love dogs, but I don't know if they have imagination. And maybe the reason that I am fighting for the human rights, I'm fighting for the source of imagination. I don't want to lose this imagination. And so unfortunately, in our part of the world, where I'm coming from, this imagination is really controlled by the family, by the society, by the politicians. And then when you start to criticize again your values, your family values or religious values, so again it becomes like you have to accept it is how it is. So so for me, I would like to see, I really encourage people here to visit Berlin. It's very easy to travel there and to visit Seyran's mosque. It is actually kind of a cyberspace going there. It's white, it's very clean. And while I was doing my films, I traveled to several parts of the country, several countries in the world. So unfortunately, I haven't really seen a mosque. Especially the female part of the mosques are very, very dirty. So, and then we are talking about, the cleanness in Islam and cleanness in our culture. You don't have a clean toilet in the female part of the mosque. So these are like kind of, these are the things that we should question. So why don't we have this cleanness? What happened? We are talking about cleanness in religion, and we don't have it in the female
reality, yeah.
Of the mosque. So when you travel and visit Seyran's mosque, so you can see that the imagination, there is something when men and women come together and they do their spiritual rituals together, something happens. I think we also train our imagination, our nafs. I mean, I don't have any hard time really imagining you, all of you are naked. I have no, I mean, it's just me, it takes me like 2 seconds. I can imagine everybody is sitting here naked. And you cannot blame me because it is my imagination, it is my freedom. But if I use my imagination and control you and say that don't sit that way, don't sit, you know, sit this way, then my imagination becomes a weapon against your freedom. And this is what is happening in our part of the world. Men are imagining and they don't know how to use their imagination, and they are controlling women, the way we act, the way we speak.
I believe it's very fair to admit that Muslim cultures nowadays have lost a lot of what was very gender equal in Islamic tradition. And I think one needs to know that Islamic tradition is very vast, it's rich. And maybe people here don't know, but females leading prayers was discussed even in the Middle Ages. Ibn Taymiyyah, the scholar from the Middle Ages, the Salafis normally like, he actually donned it, he allowed it. Ibn Arabi also spoke positively about that. So there was a discussion and there were different opinions. Yeah. And if you go back to the pre-colonial Arab world, there were many female scholars. They led Sufi networks, they were powerful, and men came to them to educate themselves about Islam. But something happened, and I spoke to a very famous female Islamic scholar today, Dr. Ingrid Madsen, and I've written that interview in my book as well. She states that after, in the post-colonial period, there were smaller states, and the ministers took over the administration of Islam. Hence, many Muslim women who were in charge before lost their power. So that has happened. So we need to revive female scholarship. And Aisha, one of the wives of the Prophet, she's among the narrators of the Prophet's sayings. She has almost narrated, I think she's second in narrating sayings from the Prophet. So I think female scholarship is important and it should be revived. What I want to point out is that we're speaking about spirituality. Of course, spirituality is an essential part of Islam. Normative Orthodox Islam has 3 parts. It's Islam, the rules, ihsan, or you can call it Sufism, you can call it the tasawwuf, tazkiyah. That's the second part, and you have, of course, the iman, which is the belief, what you believe in. So I agree that many Muslim societies have lost the spiritual dimension because we have been experiencing and growing Salafism, and that Islam is being politicized, also in Egypt and different places. Yes, we have to acknowledge that. And lastly, my main point of criticism about this project, about this so-called progressive Islam, is that it lacks theological credibility. It doesn't have a sound theological foundation, like Ibn Arabi or Ibn Taymiyyah had when they discussed female scholars. They had a tradition, they argued theologically, whereas some of the liberal Muslims today argue with the 68er movement. So you're not going to get a large following, and I find it alarming that some of the groups who have supported your project is the German AfD, the right-wing extremist party in Germany, in 2017. It's true.
No, it's not true.
I know you didn't like their support, but
No.
they praised you. They praised
No.
you. And in Norway, Human Rights Service
No.
and Islamophobia big group has supported you clearly. So I think that should be alarming about which theological foundation it is, because we need to know the context about the Muslims in the West. Many polls and surveys show, among them from Gallup, Pew Research, that Muslims still are, like generally speaking, they are far more value conservative and religious than the majority of the Europeans and the Americans. Hence, one cannot expect that they'll embrace a liberal Islam, which kind of says, okay, promiscuity is fine, let's abandon these rules, let's abandon that. I think
Promiscuous men are doing that.
yeah,
Polygamy.
that's wrong
Legally.
too, in my opinion. I'm very fond of contextualizing Islam, and that's why I wrote this book, Norwegian Islam. And I also find it plausible that practicing Muslims can support a liberal state, and so. But we need credible theology when we are contextualizing.
Sayran, does it alarm you when someone says that people on the right wing embrace your projects?
You know, this is not new. I wrote my first book when I was 17 and ran away from home, and it was published in 1983. And in 1983, people call us foreigners, Ausländer, in Germany. And we didn't have AfD in this time. And they asked me, oh, your book maybe is fitting the right wing. You should stop talking about what you are talking. And what I've done, and my friend, we wrote it together as teenagers. We just write our biography and explain everything what you have telling us, the situation, how 16, 18, 17 years old girls are living in this so-called Muslim community, Turkish, Kurdish, wherever they come, and Arabic. Just explaining, just telling our stories was so bad for some people who doesn't want to speak about that. And what happened now today also with you are a young man, I think you were not born in 1983, maybe.
No,
you
2 years later.
2 years, you see. He was not born when I started talking about the situation. And now he is a young man, he is telling me the same story. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So I'm really, somehow I'm boring about this discussion that I'm sorry. I was afraid to use my own name in 1983 when we published our book, because we were afraid about political Islam, the Islamists. You can call them however you want to call them. Because we were afraid that they will do something against us physically. I was 18, I said 17, 18 when I ran away from home, and I started working for a women's center. And I said, okay, when I would do this job in Turkey, they will kill me because I'm fighting for women's rights. And what happened in 1984, 1 year later? They shot me in Berlin in the women's center. And who did it? The right-wing Turkish people. The fascists who doesn't want women to open their eyes, live self-determinated, maybe live together with their girlfriend or alone, have a German boyfriend. The issues what we are talking now are what you explain and what I try to explain, and my clients are the victims of these issues, are still actual. And you know what? I'm so sad about the situation. I'm an eyewitness. Now I'm 56. I was 6 when I came to Berlin. In 50 years, I've seen what happened in Berlin. And for the Muslim community, I can tell you, when I was 9 years old, and the school said, now you have to learn swimming. You know, the classes in the age of 9, 4th grade, everybody has to learn to swim. It was in the 70s. What happened? I take this list, bring it to my mom. She couldn't read and write, analphabet. She take this list, give it to our neighbor, our great German grandma. She explained, and I read to my mom, and she explained has to happen, and so on. And then my mom take me on her hand. We go to Bilka, to a shopping center, and she asked me, a Muslim girl, Turkish Kurdish, do you want to have a bikini or a bath suit? 9 years old. My answer was, I don't mind. The color is important. I was a child, and nowadays I can cry when I see these Muslim girls who are not allowed to learn swimming, who are veiled in school, 6 and 7-year-old girls and boys in primary school, first grade, fasting. Now is Ramadan. Ramadan in school is a problem. It's not the problem of the Christians. I know there are conservative Orthodox Jewish people forcing marriage in Brooklyn, New York. There are people. Hindus also force marriage. We have all over the world the problems with patriarchy. But you cannot deny that we have in Germany, in Norway, in France, in Brussels, there's an Islamic party. In Europe, the most problem with the huge community of Muslim people. And they have to find a solution for the situation. How comes that 2019, you say we had done a lot of good things. How comes then that today a 9, 10, 11-year-old girl is not going to learn swimming? In Neukölln in Berlin, for example, a high rate of girls are not allowed to go to the swim classes. Why? Because they should not swim in the same place like the boys. What kind of Islam are those people teaching? I'm sorry, you write that I'm not a theological Islamic scholar. Are you an Islamic scholar? No, you are a doctor. I'm a lawyer. And I'm studying Islamic studies now at Free University in Berlin. I started studying. And all the men who takes the right in Germany, sitting on the table for the German Islam conference, look to their biography. They are not Islamic scholars or have any theological background. And what I want to say again, even say that before, you have the right to sit here and to talk. Sure, because our religion is like that. Our religion, the Islam, is a very individual religion and very basic democratic religion. This is what we are practicing in our mosque. We don't have any authorities. I don't accept the authorities, so-called authorities in Cairo, in Turkey, and the mullahs in Iran. These 3 countries, please, 3 big countries wrote so-called fatwas against our little tiny mosques. Why are you afraid about this little place and this crazy old lady? When you say I'm not a Muslim, I'm a separatist, I'm not whatever, and I'm just feeding the right wing, you know. This tiny place has such an influence. When you say I'm not standing up for Muslims, no, I finished with, this email came today, you know, every day. And we are not the minority as those people like to explain and for the public. I don't read all the whole email. Just that. I would like to give you a bit of background about myself and the search that lead me to you. I am an American, Bangladeshi, Sunni woman, about to get married to a Canadian, Indian, Ismaili man. She wants me to marry her in Lisbon. Isn't that the peace project? I'm sorry. And in my world, there's really, again, a lot of space for conservative people and moderate people, men like you. But I just want to be accepted in the plurality in Islam as a part of Islam and not getting all the statutes. And I want also be without police protection. This is what we want in this plural Islamic countries and Islamic world. Islam is not the Islam. That's what we know. As you said, there are so many conservative Christians. There are in some countries churches where men are sitting on the left side and women on the right side. We know all this. That's the reason why I say I am not fighting against Islam. I'm fighting against patriarchy and for the right of all the men and women to live self-determinated. And see, again, somebody wants to marry. Why it's not possible in a traditional mosque? They don't allow those people. And the last sentence, what I said to the 5 men, Muslims, in Ramadan, they came to me, to a woman, to say, I have to close my mosque. 5 men from Milli Görüş and Diyanet. And I tell them finally, after a discussion of 1 hour, I'm sorry, you don't understand that this is allowed what I'm doing. For all the districts, we gave theological answers. You can read it on our homepages. We published a book, Women from Medina, and we are doing workshops. We do a lot of theological work. But the last thing what I said to this man, maybe this is what they then understand finally, try to explain it very simple. Okay, you don't understand what I'm doing here, you don't accept me. Let me say it this way. There are people who don't like you because you are imam, a leader of a traditional mosque. They don't like Milli Görüş because of your political activism. And there are people who don't like the other one from Diyanet. And there are people who wants to come in such a mosque, what I opened here. You say we are just a minority? Please accept us as a minority. Maybe we are majority. You are afraid about us, but okay, we are minority. They don't like you, those people, maybe 10 of them, they like me. I opened this place for them. This is everything. They don't have to like all of you. They were a little bit surprised, but maybe they understand then finally this simple way.
Yeah. I'm a leader of an organization called Born Free. We are not, we not belong to left wing or right wing, and we welcome the sexual revolution and the book. But I just want you to present 2 other grandmothers here who have also written books, Lili Bandehi and Asra Gilani. And Asra Gilani was the first receiver of the Born Free Prize. And I want to, yes, thank you. She wrote a book called A Muslim Mom's Journey, and she wrote an article that please do accept that your children are coming a part of the society they live in, like swimming, like birthday parties and all that stuff. She wrote that, and the Born Free Prize was given to her. It was, bringing over to her by 5 young Pakistani males who were not in family with her, and it was a decision. It was kind of stunt we wanted to do, because 5 young males also grew up here, are giving the Born Free Prize to a grandmother.
Great.
And people who are watching this from Muslim backgrounds start crying.
This is it, but I mean, there are people crying in our mosque. You have seen them.
Yes. And I asked them, why are you crying? Isn't that a beautiful thing? And they said, yes, because we haven't seen that. We haven't seen this kind of acceptance. We need to see that. And that's what I'm going to tell you.
Thank you for that. This is it. This people, yeah.
We've been talking for nearly over an hour now,
I'm sorry,
and I think we could go on for hours because this is just, we just opened the door slightly ajar because there's so many interesting aspects, and I feel like I would like to comment what Shabana's saying because I don't totally agree with you, which we also have disagreed a lot through the years, but I think that I would like to end this conversation by just short comments by all of you. And I'm really sad that we can't go on for ages, but I think we can all run back to our Facebooks and our Twitter accounts and our Snapchats and whatnot, and continue the debate. And I'm sure the newspapers would love to hear more about this debate. I think this has been an incredibly healthy, interesting conversation. So I'm just going to ask you all, Sarah, you last, and be short, please.
I promise.
Yeah. So, Layal, I would like to hear some finishing comments from you, please.
I would like to say that while discussing Muslim revolution, sexual revolution, we don't hide that other religions also have problems. And I agree with you, like in Norway, I have a daughter who is 10 years old, and in Ramadan this year her teacher sent a message out to all because there were children fasting. And we teach our children to like separate in the swimming pool and stuff. they grow up thinking that every connection between a man and a woman is a sexual connection. We had in our newspaper people denying to handshake women because that will wake up some sexual feelings. And that's what I understood in your book, like, where did this come from? Because as Osman was saying, this wasn't in the beginning of Islam, like women had, Khadija also had her business and stuff. So I would recommend this book to people because I learned a lot about the history and where we are going. That's what I'm finding a little bit scary, because this is something we need to discuss more and more and more.
Yeah.
This one?
Thank you. I just want to start with declaring that, of course, I'm not an Islamic scholar, and I have never said that. And my book is also based on interviews with scholars with a long tradition in traditional Islamic studies of spirituality, among them many Sufi leaders. If you join a Hadra with them, you will experience great spiritual awakenings.
Yes, same what
but you identify yourself as a female imam, and that's what I'm pointing out. So that's the difference between us. But still, I think this whole debate is about how you define freedom, and that's a very large question. Recently, I have read some American thinkers, contemporary, Patrick Deneen, a professor at Notre Dame University. He says that actually freedom is not only chasing personal freedom. Real freedom, real liberty can be achieved by self-government, by controlling your instincts and not necessarily following them. It can be enslaving to only follow your instincts, and that's a philosophical discussion, of course. But I think nowadays, let me quote another American thinker, Ardeen Vermeul from Harvard. Today, I think we live in an age where we see liberalism, which is becoming more and more aggressive, meaning that liberals want everyone to be liberal. And the issue I'm having is that if liberalism only can tolerate itself, then it becomes very illiberal. And I think liberals should accept conservatism, not only Islamic conservatism, but Catholic conservatism, Jewish conservatism, because we have some checkpoints today. If people don't agree with them, especially regarding sexuality, identity, and gender, if you don't agree with them, you'll be exposed, you'll be subjected to public shaming, and maybe also legal punishment. So we need to be liberal in its real sense, I think. Thank you.
And Nafisa?
Yeah, I will be short. It's about theological credibility, and I think this type of definitions is very old patriarchal control mechanisms, because who is defining the credibility? When I was working on Gender Me, Islam and Homosexuality, and I had interviewed a gay imam, Imam Dayı Abdullah, and many conservative Muslims think that he doesn't have the credibility, theological credibility, because he doesn't speak Arabic and he's homosexual. So these type of rankings, it's for me, it's kind of like questionnaire from SSB, the Statistics Central Bureau. So I really think like when we imagine, so we also find credibility. And credibility is not a status quo, it's always changing. I would like to just share 3 words with you, which is, when I say the Last Supper, so you know the picture because you have seen it, because it is a part of our tradition. So my film that I'm making right now about Seyran Ateş, it is called The First Supper. So when I try to imagine, I have hard time imagining the First Supper. So this is like I'm struggling. I'm trying to find the First Supper together with Seyran. And we were actually in China, and we visited female imams in China. As I told you, there are female imams in China in the last 300 years. But fortunately or unfortunately, they don't have your angels. They are not protected.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, just replacing gender women in one place and saying that, okay, we solved the problems. Look, we have female imams, but some of the female imams that I met in China, they were quite conservatives. They were not into reform. They were not into changing the patterns that they have lived in several hundred years. So I would like to just say, Seyran, you are an inspiration, and you promise me that you are going to show in the film the magic in our religion, and I'm trying to do my best together with my cinematographer, Anders Hoft, who also traveled with us to China, and we had very interesting experiences. So I just say that just wait a couple of months and you will see the film. Thank you, Seyran.
Very short. One of the magical situation or feelings, you already have a film about that. Two women doing the dervish dance. Such a magical situation. So just can join to her and agree with you that patriarchy is our problem and the daily life. So just stand up for your rights. And as Bertolt Brecht said, if you fight, you can lose. If you don't fight, you already lose. And women have or has to lose most. And the problem what we have with the men is they are the side who is afraid to lose a lot. What's happened to the suffragettes, the Olympe de Gauche, and all the people whose heritage we are carrying. So don't forget the heritage of all the great men and women. We are responsible to keep it. Thank you for freedom.